Hi and welcome to this video in which I'm going to talk about a very cool role-playing element in Burden of Command, namely the mindsets and Crucible mechanic. I'll quickly go over what these are and how they work, then we'll go through all 8 of them and I'll give you my opinion about how strong they are and my personal tips about how to use them and when. As I said, it's just my personal opinion, so if you use them differently or have different build ideas, feel free to share them in the comments. If you like this kind of video and content, consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. If you are just starting out with Burden of Command yourself, I highly recommend you check my tutorial and early campaign tips video, which I'm going to link in the description. So let's begin. What are these mindsets and what's a Crucible? So if you are a gamer, you can think of these mindsets as a skill tree for your officers. Yeah, each skill or mindset can be invested in and offers an active and passive bonus once you reach a certain amount of points. If you're not a gamer, you can think of these as a kind of skill bank influenced by the worldview your characters have and how they relate to the ongoing war, the men, the army, and so on. There's 8 of these mindsets in total, and I'm going to read them and their, let's say like tagline or catchphrase from the Burden of Command website, which I will also link below. Now, this blog post on the Burden of Command website is a little bit old. I think it's from 2017, but most of the information they have here is still accurate. So let's look at these, let's go through these 8 mindset categories. We start up here with Doctrine, plan and prepare. Then we go clockwise, Idealism, everything will work out. Zeal, we can make this work. Cunning, find a way. Professionalism, the right way, the wrong way, and the army way. Discipline, if I say forward, you reply, how far? Caution, I can't afford to lose. And then we have here on the website Protector, but I think this is actually called Compassion now, but the tagline still fits. I need to keep my men alive. So how exactly do these mindsets work? As far as I can tell, there are 2 types of events during gameplay which can influence these mindsets. There are test events, where one or more of these mindsets is, as the name says, put to a test, or crucible events, where your characters face a very meaningful or traumatic event, or they have to take, for example, a very impactful decision. And as in real life, this kind of event leaves a permanent mark on the character's psyche and can change their worldview completely. Since the characters, for the most part, or since your character, the character that you play in the game, is for the most part going to be the leader of the company, so the captain, the other officers are going to be looking to you as either their mentor or as the one in charge, and thus you have the ability to guide them through their own crucibles. But you can also decide to let them resolve them on their own, when then I believe they follow a kind of predetermined build, but I'm not sure because I never really let them on my own. I always like to build them in a certain way. So let's now look at another example from the Burden of Command website, which illustrates exactly this kind of crucible event which influences these mindsets. So let's take a look at this example. Lethal insubordination, a very serious sounding example. We have the context. Friendly artillery pummels the enemy. Suddenly, your sergeant shouts the order to advance, without so much as a glance your way, and definitely without your command. You bark the counter order. The men stumble to a halt. Your sergeant turns, bleary-eyed from drink or shock, and repeats his own command to the men. The barrel of his rifle shifts with a dreamlike slowness your way. So a very serious situation, and then we have the choices that we can take. Choice number 1, shoot him, so shoot the sergeant before he gets my men killed. The effect is that you lose your sergeant, and this will give you a point in zeal. Second choice, sergeant, now is not the time for an advance. Even chance of squad casualties and some morale loss. Here you will gain 1 point of idealism for a mindset. Choice number 3, sergeant, I am in command here. Thrust -2, even chance of being shot, okay, and you gain a doctrine point for a mindset. And the last choice, knock the weapon from his grasp, low chance of being shot, which gives you a cunning, or a point for your cunning stat. And as always with Burden of Command, almost everything is based somehow in some historical example, and this is also true for this little Crucible we had here, where according to the website, this is based on actual events involving Lieutenant Ronald Spears, which you may recognize from Band of Brothers if you watched it. According to witnesses, Spears shot his sergeant in self-defense. So this situation didn't really happen. And here we have another example of how it's going to look like in the game. In this case, we're guiding Lieutenant Wilson through Crucible. Now, other examples I can give you from the top of my head from the game, without spoiling too much, of course. Let's think after a battle you notice a deaf civilian and then contemplate the horrors of war. And you have to choose how your character processes this. One choice could be something like, you think to yourself, if only procedures would follow to the letter, this would not have happened. And this will of course increase your doctrine, or maybe professionalism. Or something like, if only we would have defeated the enemy sooner, maybe we could have saved more innocent lives. And this would increase your zeal. There we get the idea. We also mentioned these test events. You may find yourself, for example, assaulting a entrenched machine gun position or an enemy tank with an officer in a squad. And then you get to choose how your character or how the officer approaches the situation with the men. You can either tell the men that you have to complete this assault no matter what, which will test your zeal, but also there will be a high chance that you will get casualties. Or you can tell your men to be very cautious and only assault when there is a safe opening, and this will test something like your caution. And there will be a lower chance that the enemy is destroyed, but also a lower chance of casualties. I am not 100% sure, but I think these test events, or from what I saw, they do not increase the value of the mindset points, or at least don't document that they do. And you would naturally believe that having more points in the tested mindset will give you a better result. But I didn't really have time to test that, so take it as you will. It may be that these test events actually behave just like the Crucible ones and do increase the points. I have to do a little bit more testing there. One more thing about these Crucibles. For the first 2 points you invest in each mindset, your character will also receive combat stress penalties and realism points. You can think of it like this: if a character processes a traumatic event with their existing mindset, that's a bit more easier to process, right? But if they get faced with a completely new mindset, something which completely alters their worldview, this is going to be a bit harder to process, and in the short term it's going to probably be stressful, but in the long term, by having this more broader mindset, your character will be more resistant to stress in the future. So these are what these realism points are supposed to be doing, and get your character a bit more stress resistance in the long run. What does this combat fatigue do? So this combat fatigue accumulates, and every 100 points you will get a stress point, and the stress point will reduce your orders by 1. As you know that orders are the most important resource in this game, this means that stress is something which you have to take care of as soon as possible. And you can actually reduce this in the Aid Your Men screen after a battle using loyalty points. So yeah, going into an unfamiliar mindset with a character will be stressful at first, and you need to manage this. Now it gets a little bit more complicated. So each mindset has an active bonus, which you can actively use during battles, and a passive bonus. These bonuses are only active once you have at least 3 points invested into a mindset, when then the mindset becomes itself active. I believe you can only have a maximum of 3 active mindsets at a time, but you can choose which ones are active if you have more than 3 of them with 3 points. And some bonuses affect the direct subordinates of the characters. So for a captain, this is going to be the lieutenants, and for the lieutenants, this is going to be their squads. For example, if we have some active mindset which gives you extra orders, if you activate this on the captain, you're going to give extra orders to the lieutenants. If you activate this on the lieutenants, you're going to get extra orders for the squads. Logical, right? Oh, and one more thing, the captain gets 1 active use point for each of his active mindsets and a bonus 1 at level 5. The lieutenants, however, get only 1 active point use across all their active crucibles, and this is per battle, yeah? So your lieutenants are going to be able to use only 1 active bonus once per battle, While for the captain, you can have up to, I guess, 6 usages across 3 different mindsets. So the captain is more versatile with his activities, with his abilities, while for the officers, you kind of really have to pick one and stick with it. Oh, and one more thing. I think you cannot activate mindsets which are too far apart from each other, so you can't, because they are on this kind of wheel. And you can only activate, I think, mindsets going one. So they have to be linked when you activate them. You can, for example, activate here across Professionalism, and then here something like Zeal. I'm pretty sure that doesn't work. Alright, enough talking about how they work. Let's go and look at each of them concretely, and I'm going to give you my opinion about them. We're going to start on this mindset wheel at 12 o'clock with professionalism. Professionalism achieves. So, first we have influence, accompanyability. Cultivating the respect of superiors means prestige points are plus 15% for a lieutenant, minimum of 1, and plus 20% for a captain, minimum of 2. Increase to plus 20% and plus 30% level 5, each such leader adds. However, the focus on superiors means less time for the men. The officer gains trust at a reduced rate, minus 20%. So this isn't really like an active ability, this is like a second passive on company level for resources. And then we have the passive ability, Sustained Barrage. You gain more artillery support. On occasion, off-map artillery you spotted for it's not withdrawn when it would have been. So this is primarily a resource gainer mindset for prestige. Prestige points are important as the campaign goes on, especially for replenishing experienced men when you will inevitably suffer losses. However, if you get a lot of victories and play it safe, you should have a good amount of prestige points in tow usually. And you should you always be trying to keep your losses at a minimum. So I don't know if this is that good of an ability. And for the passive, the artillery support passive does become very useful later in the campaign, where we start facing more heavy resistance with guns and tanks and vehicles and so on. But you don't get artillery support in every mission. So in each mission where that you don't have artillery support, this passive is not going to be doing anything. So all in all, it's an okay mindset. If you really if you see that you're getting you're not getting enough prestige, you could put this on a couple of your officers. Since you don't get an active ability use from it, I would not put it on my captain, because then you waste his bonus to the activities. So you could consider having this as a kind of secondary mindset on some of your officers, especially if you're making a build which uses stuff in this area of the wheel. So moving on to around 1.5 o'clock around here, we have Cunning. Cunning adapts. Active ability, Infiltrate. Activate to creep 2 axes instead of 1. Unit must end in concealment, for example brush or smoke, and then become hidden. However, new enemies are not spotted as effectively during the activation. And passive ability, Prepare ambush. Occasionally the officer will spot an ambush opportunity at the end of the move, will become hidden, and maintain at least 1 order afterward, so they may undertake any action. So here this active ability sounds good until you remember that you can only use this once per battle, or twice if you're a captain. So I guess you could use this as a infiltration ability at the start of mission to get some good positioning, or to really do a very, very tough flanking maneuver around enemies. But for me it's very, very situational. The passive, however, is pretty useful, so you get an extra order. You potentially get an extra order for your officer. And yeah, orders are very important, so anything that gives you an extra order is useful. Yeah, like I said, the passive, I don't really think it's that useful. The active isn't really that useful, but the passive, yeah, it could be useful on any officer, on a captain or a lieutenant. Now we go to 3 o'clock. Zeal. Zeal overcomes. Active ability, follow me. Launch a highly enhanced assault, take no suppression, and gain a significant advantage flanking. Casualties can still occur, especially if the unit acts rashly. For example, move in the open versus unsuppressed enemies. Morale checks are still required. And the passive ability Berserk, a unit that suffers a casualty may go Berserk and attempt to assault the nearest enemy. Stronger than Follow Me, but just as vulnerable. So this active assault ability becomes really useful later in the campaign when facing tougher enemies. But again, you have to remember this is a once per battle usable advantage, or twice for your captain. And you gotta be careful about this passive ability. So if that gets triggered sometime when you really don't want it to, it may cause a lot more damage to a squad that's already not in a good situation. I would say for a very experienced player with a very experienced squad later in the campaign, this Zeal can be quite useful. It especially helps you break very tough flank positions of the enemy. Maybe you could use it together with Cunning to get first in a really good position and then just rip out the strongest, completely destroy the strongest squads of the enemies. Now let's move to 5 o'clock-ish. We have Idealism. Idealism inspires. Grandstand, active ability. The officer stands up within weapons range of an enemy unit. This outrageous and courageous action rallies all friendly units within 3 hexes and LOS. They will also retain at least 1 order. However, there is a 15% chance to become a casualty. The passive ability Inspire. Occasionally, if the officer stacks with a friendly unit with more than 4 suppression, rally them, restore an order, and then bolster for 3. So this active ability is very powerful, but also very high risk. So it has the potential of turning a completely lost battle into a major victory like that. But there are 2 caveats, right? So first of all, you have a 15% chance that your officer goes down. And I don't know about you, but having your very experienced officers go down, even if you rally everyone around them, that's still pretty bad. And secondly, to use this, you have to come into this very bad situation in the first place. Like we discussed at Professionalism, right? You should be trying to avoid these situations as much as possible. So a lot of stuff had to go wrong if you are in the situation where you have like everybody completely suppressed and unable to move. But at the same time, it's still good to have this kind of get out of jail, not free, get out of jail, potentially losing your leader card. The passive ability, however, is useful in all battles and all situations, because you're going to get shot at pretty much all the time, and it's not that uncommon to have to maybe, I would say sacrifice, but not really. So somebody has to open the way sometimes, right? You're not sure about something, you send a squad there, they get shot at, all the enemies shoot them, they get completely suppressed. Now you know where the enemies are, but your poor squad is there sitting, putting their heads in the sand, and then you can just move an officer with them, and if you're lucky and you trigger this passive ability, you instantly rally them and get an order and a bolster. So this is really good. So all in all, this is a good mindset. The passive is very useful. The active ability can get you out of trouble, but it's also really dangerous. Still, I would say it's a very strong mindset, and you should have this, I think, at least on your captain. But the passive is also good on officers as well. So now we are at 6 o'clock. Doctrine. Doctrine directs. We have the active ability By the Book. Your men know the drill. The officer and their immediate reports gain an extra order. For a captain, this means they're lieutenants. For a lieutenant, they're squads. Passive ability Well Rehearsed. Occasionally, if a unit with the officer is about to become spent, the unit instead gains an order, and up to 3 suppression is removed due to the steadying influence of their routine. And also another trait, Doctrinaire. However, the officer gains XP 15% slower. You know what the Captain Pigeon says, orders are the most important resource in the game, so you won't be surprised to hear that the activity which potentially gives you the most extra orders, I consider to be one of the best ones. The ability, sorry, not the activity. So the active one gives an extra order to your immediate subordinates. So for a captain, that is to himself and to all of the lieutenants, and to the lieutenants to all of their squads. And if you combine this, so you get a one extra order from your captain, and then you apply the same, you have the same one on your lieutenants, you can potentially get a lot of extra actions done in a turn. Again, remember, this is only once or twice per battle activity, but I think that orders, and especially you can use them then how you want, are the most impactful thing you can get. Of course, you have to plan it a little bit, so if everyone is already spent and you just pop it on your captain, then your officers aren't really going to be able to do anything with it. So you have to prepare a little bit, like spend, maybe leave, like don't use it when everybody's already completely spent, but when you have like 2 orders remaining for each for each of the lieutenants, then you can use this activity, this ability. Why do I keep saying activity? Ability on your captain. And for the officers, yeah, of course, it's always good. The passive ability is also extremely good. So if you have an officer going together with a squad, stacking them, when the squad remains without an order, then you have the potential of gaining an order and losing some suppression, which is again extremely good. And you are going to be stacking together with squads a lot of the time, so this has the potential to trigger quite often. The experience nerf is, I think, not that bad, because officers anyway gain experience at a pretty high rate, because you're using them mostly all the time to do a lot of things. So I think it's good. I think this is one of the best mindsets you can have. Let's move now to something like a 7 o'clock compassion. Compassion compels. Active ability. Again, we have like professionalism, and not an active ability, but a company ability. Band of brothers. Compassion can deepen trust and reduce stress. Loyalty points are plus 50% for a lieutenant and plus 20% for a captain. Yeah, okay, so you get more loyalty points. However, compassion comes at a cost, increased combat fatigue for this leader. And we have the passive ability, comrades in arms. On occasion, a squad moving with the leader gains a casualty. A struggle has returned or a light wound is overcome. So this is the trust loyalty counterpart that we had for professionalism. Again, no active ability. Every officer which has this adds to the point to the loyalty points that are being received. The cost here with plus 20% combat fatigue is, I would say, is a bit steep. Now remember from the beginning, combat fatigue, every 100 points of combat fatigue, you will get a stress point which reduces your order. So you really have to be careful and manage this. However, the passive is quite useful, although very situational. So the only way you have of replenishing losses, casualties, is normally in these between mission aid your men sequences. You have to either give invest experience or a I think loyalty cost to get to replenish your men. And if you the casualties during the missions, you cannot replenish casualties without this passive, and so a squad is going to be at a disadvantage for the whole mission. However, if you have this passive, there is a chance that you will regain the casualty during the mission and basically heal your squad. And I think this is the only way you can ever achieve something like that. So this passive is worth this mindset is worth getting, especially for this passive. But I wouldn't get it on all officers, so maybe have it on one of your officers, and or maybe on your captain, because then you can go with every squad from every platoon. And when you get a casualty, you know, okay, I have my compassion captain here, get him a move to that squad always, and then at some point during a mission, you're gonna heal that squad, most probably. But then again, if you're doing that, then you're wasting the active points you could get for a captain, so yeah. You have to think about it. But still, a strong though situational passive. Now we move on to 9 o'clock, and we have here Caution. Caution prevents. So active ability, send a scouting party. Select a reachable hex. You are guaranteed to reveal all enemies in the targeted hex and all adjacent hexes. You also gain a normal LOS check from the targeted hex, as if a unit were present. Your scouts are out there. However, if enemies are adjacent to or worse in that hex, a friendly unit may take casualties. Scouts lost. And the passive ability Sixth Sense. Occasionally a concealed enemy that has not yet been seen will be revealed. So in my opinion, this active ability sounds good on paper, but again, remember you can only use this once per battle, and it's a little bit like you use it to scout and find enemies, but if you use it correctly and find enemies, then you have the potential of getting a casualty. I don't know, that for me that's just not worth it. And the passive also sounds a little bit useful, but the thing is, you kind of know where the enemies are for the most part, and yeah, you can use like this unaimed fire to test if enemies are there, and at some point you're gonna need to reach your objectives anyway. So I don't know, for me this is one of the weakest, one of the weaker abilities, at least for my party style. I could see some use in it if you use it maybe with, so for the passive, one use could be if you having trouble finding targets for your machine guns or for your long range weapons. So maybe you could put this on the officer from the heavy weapons platoon, and then when the passive triggers, you can maybe see some extra targets from long range. But you have to compare it with other things you can use, right? Where you can get other mindsets. So I don't know. Like I said, all in all, for me, one of the weaker ones. I don't really see any use for it, and the trade-off for the active is just, for me, way too expensive. And now finally we get to 11 o'clock, where we have Discipline. Discipline endures. So the active ability Pour It On. The officer's men know how to gain fire superiority. They acquire significantly enhanced chance to win initiative, akin to flanking, and an improved fire effect, akin to fire from above. The men also become undaunted when receiving fire, however this costs the squad 2 orders to execute. Unyielding, passive ability. On occasion, if receiving fire, the officer and men will first become undaunted and then rally for 3 after the conclusion. Discipline. This is basically the range version of Zeal, which allows you to get a very effective shot with Pour It On. However, whereas with Zeal you would charge the enemy and potentially take them out permanently, Discipline, this firing shot with Discipline, will only get them gain a lot of suppression and maybe some casualties, but the squad will still be there, so you're still going to need somebody to go in and assault them. The passive, however, is very good, since receiving fire is one of the constants that will happen in battles, so having some kind of outward rally chance after gaining suppression is very, very strong for any squad. All in all, I think this is a strong ability, a strong skill, especially for the passive. I would say it's maybe useful for the heavy weapons lieutenants, so that you can really lay down very, very effective fire on some enemies at range. You will, however, use 2 orders for it, so normally a heavy machine gun uses 1 order, but you get a lot of advantages for it. Depending on how you play with your captain, you could also put this on your captain if you're using your captain a lot if you're using your captain more for shooting at a distance instead of going for assaults and stuff like that. Or if you use your captain more at the back line near where the heavy weapons are, this could be a good part of the build for the captain. So there we have all of them, went through with my opinion, and now for the final opinion on the builds that I use, or what I usually do. So what I usually do is to go for Doctrine first on the Captain, and at some point I will want to get to level 5 Doctrine and the Captain. This gives you 2 uses of the active ability, so in effect you get 5 extra orders on demand for your officers in every battle. Now you can use this at the beginning in some defensive missions to get in a good position, or you can just keep it for when you have a really do or die situation where we need an extra order, of course. The passive is also very good if you use stacking. I use my Captain in frontal positions quite a lot, either in the front line or right behind the front line. So I will then usually take Idealism as a second mindset, especially for that passive, which can reduce suppression, and also for that get out of jail card. But yeah, it's gotta get really, really bad before I use that one, because there's a chance you lose the officer. And as a third skill for the Captain, depending on your playstyle, you could take Compassion, since that gives you this chance to regain casualties during the mission, which is very good. Or you could take Zeal, depending on your playstyle. So if you really do a lot of assaults with your Captain, take Zeal, get it to level 5, and then you have 2 very, very powerful assaults in one match. But you gotta be careful about the berserk mechanic, about the passive for that one. For the officers, I'd say more or less the same. Doctrine is the main one that I take because it gives you extra orders for your squads. And as the 2 secondaries, again, Compassion, Idealism or Zeal, depending how you use your officers. For the heavy weapons, Lieutenant, however, you may consider a different build on the other part of the wheel, using Discipline as the main stat. And then for that extra for that special fire active move, and the passive is also good there, of course, and Professionalism as a secondary for the artillery bonus, and then maybe Caution for the passive ability, or you can also go with Cunning, I would guess. So there you have it. Now you know my recommendations, the way that I play. You can of course experiment with different ones, or you could just say I'm gonna roleplay and think what would the character say in the situation, think in the situation and see what kind of build you end up with then. Alright, so thanks for watching, and if you found this video interesting, consider giving a like or subscribing. If you want to see my tactical playthrough of the campaign, which is narrated by me with live reactions, check the playlist on my channel. I have heard that these videos help you go to sleep as a form of white noise or ASMR, so if you want to listen to something while doing something else or going to sleep, consider giving them a look out. Alright, this has been Battle Pigeon, signing off.